Now, let's bring in the chair of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, Republican Bob Corker of Tennessee, for his first television interview since the agreement. Senator, I know you have been briefed in some detail by top administration officials. What's your, and I understand it's a framework, but what's your initial reaction to what you've learned?
Chris, I did reach out to the Energy Secretary, and I've had 3 conversations with him over the last couple of days. I think it'd be very difficult for anyone to ascertain at this moment, as you just reported in Iran. They're reporting the sort of the mirror image opposite of what's being reported here. And as you saw, Zarif has actually challenged Secretary Kerry for presenting talking points that are only intended to cause Congress to be pleased. So look, there's a lot of water that needs to go under the bridge here. Many details are unknown at this point, and so I don't know how anyone could really ascertain whether this is something good or bad yet for the American citizenry.
Now, there are some key issues that both sides agree haven't been settled yet. One of the questions is how fast the sanctions will be lifted. Another one is how quickly Iran could ramp up its centrifuge program after the initial 10 years. But let me just ask you, and I understand that you don't know all the details, are there any red flags that you see right now? Is there anything that, at least at this initial point, looks clearly unacceptable to you?
So there are 4 things I would lay out. First of all, as you mentioned, how will the sanctions be relieved? Iran is saying immediate, the U.S. is saying phased. And what are the elements that we're going to be looking at to alleviate those? Secondly, and very importantly, the covert activities. What are the SNAP types of inspections we're going to be able to do? What are the processes that are going to be in place? Is this going to create some long dispute? Thirdly, you refer to the document refers, not even in capital letters, to a nuclear development program that Iran has agreed to. It's my understanding that this has actually been written out, and yet none of us have been able to see that. And I'll just stop there. Those are 3 of the red flags. One more I'd mention. There's a process through which Iran is going to lay out their previous military dimensions, and yet it doesn't say when that process is going to begin, when it's going to end. Is this going to be done by the time that there's a final agreement? So those are some of the red flags. Again, I'm open. I know there are a lot of details that will be worked out over the next several months, and that's why, on behalf of the American people, Congress needs to be playing a role. What the American people may not know right now, Chris, is there'll be all kinds of classified annexes that are very important. They lay out the details as to how much of this is going to take place, and that's why it's so important that Congress play its rightful role in approving this prior to the congressionally mandated sanctions that we put in place are alleviated.
Well, let me get to that right now, because your committee, the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, will meet on April 14th, that's just 9 days from now, to consider legislation that you have already introduced. And let me put up on the screen what that legislation would call for. The president would be prohibited from suspending, not even ending, but even suspending any congressional sanctions for 60 days while the House and Senate review the deal. But President Obama says this.
If Congress kills this deal, not based on expert analysis and without offering any reasonable alternative, then it's the United States that will be blamed for the failure of diplomacy. International unity will collapse, and the path to conflict will widen.
Senator, a couple of questions. Will your committee actually vote on your bill on April 14th, and will you insist on congressional review?
Absolutely, Chris. Again, I think everyone would say that the congressionally mandated sanctions are what helped in a strong way get Iran to the table. And so certainly we should approve this deal. We should approve what we see prior to those being lifted. And look, I've talked to the negotiators. No one has said that Congress weighing in would have any effect on this deal. As a matter of fact, what we know is just quite the contrary. We know that during the negotiations, the fact that Congress was likely to weigh in was something that the administration, the other Western countries were able to use to ensure that this deal isn't worse than it is. So the fact that they knew that Congress was going to weigh in was helpful in the negotiations. Certainly the American people want to know that someone is teasing out all of the details, especially as they see Iran reporting one thing in their country and the U.S. something else here. So look, this is a place for sober and thoughtful people to dig in. Look, I want to see a negotiated agreement. I know that a lot of water has to go under the bridge over the next 90 days, and it's very important that Congress is in the middle of this, understanding, teasing out, asking those important questions, just like the ones that you've begun to ask this morning.
But Senator, Foreign Minister Zarif of Iran said yesterday that if there is no deal or if the West backs out, then Iran will be free to continue to resume and to build back its nuclear program. And President Obama says that sanctions, the existing sanctions prior to this negotiation, didn't stop Iran from developing its nuclear program, for instance, 19,000 centrifuges. And then the president said this.
Do you really think that this verifiable deal, if fully implemented, backed by the world's major powers, is a worse option than the risk of another war in the Middle East?
First of all, your reaction to Foreign Minister Zarif's comments about their ability to continue a program, their nuclear program, if the West backs out. And secondly, what about the president saying sanctions don't work, and if you kill this deal, we are going to end up with a war?
So look, there's always this straw man. As has been said, Chris, we'd be better off today with the interim deal continuing as it is today if we think that we're moving to a bad deal. One of the things that most Americans may not be aware of, but we'd be releasing about $130 billion to the Iranian government. Once we make this deal over time, their economy is going to flourish. So again, I think to pose this straw man of a war, the fact is that Congress has a rightful role to play in this. We know that we've already played a positive role. Going through this in detail and making sure that all the questions are answered is an appropriate thing for us to do. And that doesn't mean that there won't be a deal. We've just set in place a process to ensure that if there's a deal, it's a deal that will stand the test of time, that will keep Iran from getting a nuclear weapon.
Senator, there are some details I want to go through quickly with you if I can, sort of housekeeping, if you will. One proposal that has been floated is a non-binding vote by Congress. You could disapprove the deal, but then the president could still go ahead and suspend sanctions. Is that acceptable?
No. No, it's not. I think the bill that we've laid out that has strong bipartisan support, Chairman Menendez, who now has stepped down as we know, but Chuck Schumer supports this. Tim Kaine, who's been very active, very close to the administration, supports this. There's strong bipartisan support for a binding vote by Congress. This is not something, look, the president needs to sell this to the American people, and Congress needs to be involved in this way.
All right, let me ask you the second question. The White House has said that the president would veto the kind of legislation you're proposing. If he does, you don't need 51 votes or even 60 votes. You need 67 votes, which means 13 Democrats to override his veto. Do you have 67 votes?
Well, I don't know whether we have 67 votes or not, just with co-sponsors, and if every Republican supports it, we'll see how that all shapes out. But we've got 64 or 5 that we're aware of today, if that were the case. I've talked to numbers of Democrats over the weekend, and I think there are many more that are considering this. Look, I think the American people want the United States Senate to go through this deal. They understand this is one of the most important geopolitical agreements that will take place during this decade. This is an appropriate place for us to be. If the president feels like this is something that's good for the nation, surely he can sell this to the United States Senate and the House.
Finally, sir, and I got about 30 seconds left, the formerly top Democrat on your committee, Senator Bob Menendez, who you mentioned of New Jersey, has taken a very hard line on a deal and in fact co-sponsored your mandatory congressional review. He has just been indicted on bribery charges. Do you believe there is any connection between his opposition to the president on this and on Cuba and the fact that he's been brought up on charges?
Chris, I can't, I don't know what's going on behind the scenes. I know that Bob Menendez has been a very good partner on foreign policy issues. He's been very constructive. I'm sure that he will continue to be. As to the motivations of the Justice Department, I just would have no way of knowing.
Senator Corker, we're going to have to leave it there. Thank you so much for coming in and talking to us today, and we'll follow what happens with your legislation, sir.
Thank you, sir.